Startup, shutdown, and Oracle's initialization file. In this nugget, we're going to take a look at the privileges required to start up and shut down your database, as well as what are the 3 steps that occur. We'll also take a closer look at the initialization file or the SP file. There's 2 different types of files that we can use for startup, and we'll discuss both of them in detail. And then I'll show you how to alter those parameters. You can do it either through a text editor or dynamically. Sometimes you'll want to create a parameter file from an SP file and vice versa, so I'll show you how and when you would do that. And then the last thing we'll do is take a look at our data dictionary views to find out more interesting information about those initialization parameters. In order for you to start up or shut down the database, you have to have special privileges. Now, it wouldn't make sense to just let anybody on your database take your database down, would it? Yeah, we've got this mission-critical database that's taking in $2,000 a minute, and Joe Schmo comes along and pulls the plug. No, that's not going to fly. So what conditions need to be met for you to start up or shut down that database? Well, you need to either have operating system authentication as a DBA, or you need to have sysdba privileges or sysoper privileges. Now we'll talk more about these 3 different privileges in our security nugget, but what I do want to emphasize is that there is a difference between sysdba and sysoper. The sysdba privilege simply means that you can pretty much do anything you want to the database. You can see everything in the database. The sysoper privilege just allows you to do certain things such as starting up, shutting down, more or less basic administration tasks. Now I just connected /sysdba, which means I'm not using a database username and password. Instead, I'm using operating system authentication. Now I'm able to do this because I'm logged in on my operating system as a user that belongs to the Oracle DBA group. Now we will cover this again in our security nugget. Let's talk about the Oracle startup process. The first thing that's going to happen, and we're assuming here that your database is completely shut down, nothing's running, the first thing we're going to do is start the instance. This is what we call the unmounted stage. When you start an instance, remember an instance is just a collection of background processes and memory structures, and that allows us to later tap into our database. So all we're doing is starting the instance. So it's during instance startup that Oracle is going to go to the Oracle Home DBS directory. It's going to look for a file called spfilesid.ora. So if our Oracle SID is ORCL, it will look for spfileorcl.ora. If that's not there in the directory, then it looks for spfile.ora. If it's not there, then it will look for initsid.ora. And if that's not there, then you're in trouble. Your instance will not start. There is an exception to that rule. If you give the option of specifying exactly which initialization file to look for during startup, then it will look for that specific file name. Let's take a look at my directory structure. Here is my Oracle Home, where this DB1 is, and underneath there I have my DBS directory, and here we go. It found the spfileorcl.ora, so that's the file it's using. The next step is called the mount mode. This is when the instance is actually associated with a database. Now within all of your initialization parameters, there is one parameter called control_files, and that's going to point to hopefully 3 copies of your control files. You must have at least 1. And that's what determines which control files are going to be mounted. Now if the control files don't exist, or for some reason they're corrupted, then this stage will fail. Your control files contain pointers to your data files and your redo logs, and so if none of those are present, then the open stage is going to fail. So the 3rd stage is when we open the database. That's when the data files and the redo logs are open, and that's also when the database is available to everyone. Now let's take a look at what splashes across the screen when we start up. Okay, I'll just say start up. Okay, now so this sometimes takes a few seconds. It really depends on your memory structures and how many data files you've got. Okay, our instance started. All that stuff that splashed across the screen, it told us how large our SGA is. Database mounted. Okay, good. We hit the second stage. Now we're just waiting for our database to open. And voila. Let's look at our parameter called control files, just so you can see. I'll say show parameter control underscore files. And it is a little difficult to read, but it is here. It looks like we've got 1, 2, 3 copies of our control files. The reason why we have 3 copies is in case one of them fails, we at least have a good copy somewhere, hopefully. An ideal situation is to have all 3 of these copies on different disks in case you've got media failure. Do you want to see what happens when we get rid of these control files? Let's remove this third control file. It's under my Oracle Product 10.2.0 Oradata OCL directory. Okay, here's that directory, and I'm just going to go ahead and delete it. Okay, you'll see it's no longer there. I went ahead and I shut down the database. Let's go ahead and restart it up. I'll show you later how to shut down the database. Okay, so now we're going to do startup. The instance should start just fine. Okay, there we go. And then it tried to mount it. Error in identifying our control file. We can check our alert log. Well, where's our alert log? It's going to be in our background dump dest directory. We can do a show parameter background. We could go to this directory right down here and look at our alert log. Or we can just use our intuition and say, hey, you know what? Something's wrong with our control file. So at this point, we would say show parameter control files. And notice that we have 3 control files that we must have, and in our directory we only have 2. So let's go ahead and assume that these are both good copies, and we will copy it into this directory. Okay, good. Now we need to rename this, of course, to be called control03.ctl. Now we can go back to our screen and see which mode we are in. We can say select status from $instance, and it shows us that our database is in the started mode. So we can say alter database mount. So as you see, when it says that the status is started, it means that the database is in unmount mode. Right now our database is not opened yet. To open it, we would say alter database open. So now it should be available for regular users to log in. Okay, there we go. Now the process of shutting down the database is the exact opposite of starting up. You're going to go from the open mode to then closing the database, then unmounting the database, in other words, disassociating the instance from the database, and then shut down the instance. In other words, get rid of those memory structures and background processes. There's actually 4 different modes of shutting down. If you just say shut down without any arguments, that's a normal shutdown. A normal shutdown is going to wait for every session to close before it actually shuts down. So oftentimes you'll be sitting there waiting forever. Really what's more optimal is to use some of these other options. For example, transactional is going to wait for a transaction to finish, or all the transactions to finish. In other words, a commit or a rollback. Once again, you can be waiting there quite a long time if there's someone who's issued an insert or an update and they've went out to lunch and haven't typed in commit or rollback. Immediate, shutdown immediate is the most common way of shutting down. This is going to terminate every session and then perform the shutdown. And then think of the shutdown abort as being your very last resort if none of these work. The thing to keep in mind about shutdown abort is that when you then start your database back up again, Oracle is going to have to perform instance recovery. In other words, it's going to apply all of the redo logs to your database. So the startup might take a little bit longer than the other shutdown modes. Let's look at another way of starting up. You can say startup pfile equals da 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 da. Okay, so here you're giving the full path to an initialization file, and that can be called anything. Mine looks like it's for a data warehouse, DW there. I've seen some companies use a parameter file for daytime activity if they're using an online transaction processing system, and then during nighttime they use special parameters for data warehousing. Of course, when you're switching out these parameter files, you have to bounce the database, so those are companies that can afford to have a little bit of downtime.